welcome to Vermont Film Essentials. I'm Lincoln L. Hayes.
And my name is David Metzger.
We are covering Some Like It Hot, Billy Wilder's fantastic comedy from 1959.
Yes.
Oof, nailed
Got it.
But before we get into that, look, we have mugs.
Official.
I made mugs with our logo on them because I'm a nerd. We got merch, guys. I don't think we can sell it yet, but we got it. If you want it, let us know. Why did we pick this film? Why is this episode 2 of season 2? Why did you want to go right with Billy Wilder again?
For me, anyone who is going to start getting into comedy writing or into comedy, I think this is one of the best comedies that you can look at. And for my money, my favorite comedy, along with Young Frankenstein. And one of the prized comedy scripts that just, if you want to look at it in terms of timing, if you want to look at it in terms of structure, and in terms of just making you laugh out loud consistently, there's no better screenplay, no better movie to study.
Absolutely. I first saw this in high school, in the same class that I saw The Godfather with my teacher, Clark Jeanette. And again, I saw it in 42-minute chunks, so it was a little disjointed. But I do remember that it was incredibly funny, very relatable, and the gangster plot is exciting and it's thrilling, and it's absurd to think that these two men could ever be acceptable as ladies, but they are attractive ladies. So I guess there's that, but it's ridiculous.
Right.
And Marilyn Monroe is great in it, despite all the stories you hear about the trouble she had on the production. And I was very happy. You may remember at the end of last week's episode, I said that it might not hold up, in my opinion, and it did. It did. You're right. I think what I was thinking about was Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, which I've heard does not hold up as well. But maybe we'll get there someday. When was the first time you saw something like that?
Kind of similar. I mean, we talked about when we discussed The Apartment that was like my first moment when I realized who Billy Wilder was.
Right.
So I just went right down the line, and Some Like It Hot was next. So I watched it alone, and I'm laughing. I enjoy it. Then, similarly, we watched it in our film appreciation class in high school. Yep. Once again, 42-minute chunks. And I appreciated how much we all were laughing in the class. And there was all different types of people in that class.
Right. And
we were all laughing at the same thing. And that really kind of triggered me oh, okay, this is not just...
Not just film nerd funny. This is everybody funny.
Right.
Yeah.
And, from there on out, it was okay, this Billy Wilder guy is no joke. So I kept on going, but for me, this just remains in terms of just sheer, ridiculous, farcical humor that also has a lot of heart to it. That is also grounded in a sense of reality, so you don't have to suspend your disbelief so much. Obviously, in color, we would probably know that that's Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis.
Yep.
But
and that's exactly why it's in black and white.
Right.
But I mean, watching the movie, I was trying to think of modern equivalents to it or modern homages to it, and obviously White Chicks comes to mind, which I never saw, but I've heard incredibly positive reviews of that movie, that it's just really, really funny and really smart despite its seemingly obvious joke.
Right.
But it follows the same trope of this. It's who wouldn't be able to tell that they're men just from their build and their voices and everything else? But you just, after the first couple scenes, you're yeah, whatever. We'll just accept it. They're women now. And
I think he does such a great job in the writing of hooking you right from the start, so that you do believe it. You do want to, the first time, one of my favorite, backstories of this is that Billy Wilder was talking to, I think it was William Wyler or some other director, and he asked him what are you doing next? And he's oh, we're writing a story about two musicians that have to dress up like women and disguise themselves because they witnessed the St. Valentine's Day massacre. And he's Billy, you can't base a comedy around violence and mayhem like that. They'll run you out of the streets like that's. And he's like, no, we'll do it.
It'll work.
And it does. Like from that opening shot where, the 1920s vehicles are going, and then all of a sudden you get this chase, and you're like, oh my god! And like he's breaking the windows and he's firing the Tommy gun, and then the car crashes and he looks in the back and the alcohol
leaking.
And then 1929, and you're like, oh, this is great.
Yeah, I know what we're doing. I know where we're at, and I'm on board. Let's go. That opening scene is so great. You see these faces. Like they don't make faces like that anymore of those guys. And I mean,
buttermilk.
Just you could tell that they were like fighters or boxers or something. Just faces cut out of wood.
And a lot of them, were in Warner Brothers gangster films.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like with this movie, that opening scene, you could swear that you were about to watch a crime film from that time, or a gangster film for that matter. And it just, that sense of reality and that sense of authenticity to the violence of it is what makes you believe, like, okay, like I don't care how ridiculous it is. I would do whatever I need to do to get away from these crazy people.
And because the stakes are so high, then you accept and you're on board with these guys. You want them to get away. You want them to be safe, because they're just musicians. They were in the wrong place in the wrong time. You don't want them to get rubbed out by the mob.
Right.
So sure, dress up as women and go to Florida. That makes sense. Go, do it.
And that scene just keeps on going. Like, there's that opening chase sequence, and then you get into the speakeasy, and you follow the undercover cop as he goes in there.
Yep.
And there's all these like little cute lines in terms of there's this witty dialogue about it, but then when that camera moves up and all of a sudden you see Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis and they start bickering, that's when you're just like, okay, I love both of you.
Yep. Now we know we're in a Billy Wilder comedy, because up until that point there's not really any comedy to it other than the whole joke of the parlor is they don't serve booze, they serve coffee. So you can have Scotch coffee or Canadian coffee, wink wink. And then he wants to sit at the closer table, and then, that's for family members only, wink, wink. There's a lot of winking going on. And then, like you say, when we push in on them, it's just like, okay, I'm excited, let's go. What are we going to do? Where's this going to go? And, they're down on their luck. They need money. It's payday. Tony Curtis wants to blow all their money on a dog race, and he's like, no, I need a filling. My teeth hurt. So it's like real world versus, the kind of idyllic lifestyle of the artist musician of just like, we'll just get by however we get by. And Jack Lemmon's like, I need to take care of real world problems.
Right.
And then I love the bit where they look over and they see the cop pinning his badge onto his shirt, because they're just like, okay. And then they just get all their stuff and start putting their instruments away in the middle of a song. Like they've completely stopped playing, but they're like, nope, it's time for us to go. Let's take this off and put it away. And then once the raid happens, they're already out the door, and they have all of that stuff that goes on, and it's so silly and so fun, but with life or death stakes at the same time. Right.
And he, Jack Lemmon. So I watch The Apartment and I go, oh my God, Jack Lemmon is great.
Yeah.
And this, I'm like, he's just so funny. He's so funny
all the time.
And that neurotic humor that I just love, and you see it, like he birthed it, like whatever he was doing, that's what led to like Woody Allen, Charles Grodin, Ben Stiller, all on and on and on. Like he just has that nebbish personality that you just can't help but love, and I can't say it enough. He is just so funny.
Yeah.
Like when you said that last week about it not holding up, I'm like, you know what? Even if everything fails, I know Jack Lemmon is still funny. Like it can't be that Jack Lemmon is not funny. And that's the case with this. Is just from the opening shot, and when, so we have this whole first act where they witness the murder, and it's really like it is a massacre.
Yeah. It's rough.
And there's no mistaking it. Like, they don't show it, obviously, because they can't. But, I mean, you get the impact of it, and you get how much it frightens the hell out of them.
And then you also get how far Spats is going to go too, because when the last guy is going for the phone, he takes the gun and he finishes him off himself, which if you know anything about organized crime, especially because we just watched The Godfather last week, when you're the Don, when you're the boss, you don't pull the trigger ever, because you have to have deniability. So for him to take the gun and kill that guy, that's like next level. So they know that they are in some serious trouble if they get caught. And then, you know, the gas hose falls out and then they're caught and they're able to get away. But there's a moment there where it's pretty scary for those characters.
And you know, in terms of the comedy writing, so that's the catalyst that gets us to that next point, that gets them on the phone. Tony Curtis's, you know, do you still need two women?
Yep.
Jack Lemmon's like, what? And then makes the woman's voice, and then all of a sudden he gets it, and then we cut right to them. They're dressed as women.
Yep.
They're
hobbling
getting
down
on the train.
thing.
And it's just, you know, it could have just been a one-joke comedy throughout. But the fact that they take the time and, you know, as structurally sound, like I think that this screenplay you can kind of time a watch to. It's just so perfectly made and perfectly constructed. That train sequence is the one sequence where you can say, okay, they, you know, we sacrificed a little bit of running time because there's a lot of story and a lot of pipe that they have to lay in this. And it would be one thing if it was just, you know, a joke for the sake of having a joke, but it is story all the way through, and it's always enjoyable. And
we have a lot of characters that we have to introduce all of a sudden. Like,
characters.
we need to know at least an idea of who all these band members are. I mean, if it were like a quartet, sure, but it's a full band. So they are parts of this band, and we have to see how they fit in and how their characters are going to fit in with the other characters. And then we're introduced to Sugar, Marilyn Monroe's character, and you know, she's got her own tragic backstory that we've got to introduce and bring in and interweave with her and Tony Curtis, and it's seamless. There's not a dull moment in this movie. Even, you know, the quieter moments when it's her and Jack Lemmon in the bed and they're, you know, talking to each other and kind of snuggling, and he's like, I'm a girl, I'm a girl, I'm a girl. So funny.
So funny.
And relatable, because it's Marilyn Monroe, guys. The Vapors, yeah.
And this is the one movie where, you know, you can say what you want about Marilyn Monroe and how, you know, she obviously, she's not going to go down in history as one of the great thespians. No. But I think this was the one film and the one character that she attached herself to that had a lot more depth and a lot more heart and a lot more darkness to her. And you almost kind of, you know, now that we know exactly what her backstory was and how tragic it was, you almost watch this film in a whole different light, and her performance in a whole different light, because you know what is behind, you know, that just that pretty face and those pretty eyes and that, you know, that sheepish personality that she has, and the whole way that they introduce that too is so great, because, you know, obviously she gets on the train, Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis see her, and they're like, boom, like, you know, we're the sexist guys that are going to go after the girl, even though we really can't, because that's going to make us. And then, you know, the whole thing on the train cart with her in the bed, and I'm a girl, I'm a girl, I'm a girl. And then when she gets up, and, you know, Joe is the one that's just trying to, you know, let's not, you know, you can't blow this for us. Like, just be quiet. Just why are you getting yourself in trouble again?
Exactly.
And that is when it's like, well, that's just what I do. I just get myself in trouble. I always get the fuzzy end of the lollipop. Perfect lines again.
He writes such great dialogue. And, you know, knowing what's going on in her personal life at this point, she's, you know, hours late for calls. She doesn't know any of her lines. She can't memorize her lines. She's addicted to pills. She's, you know, on uppers and downers. While they're filming this, she's pregnant, and then she eventually loses a child, one of her many miscarriages that she has in her life. And just knowing all of that, on the surface, it's like, oh, you're not a professional, you know, you're a floozy, you're just a pretty face. But knowing everything that's going on in her life and everything that she's dealing with, the performance that Billy Wilde is able to get from her in this film is phenomenal. Because you look at other films with actors who are, you know, abusing this, that, or the other thing, or, you know, difficult to work with or anything like that. And it shows in their performance where they either feel like they're phoned in or they're not really there. And I mean, the fact that she's able to deliver some of the speeches that she does in this film, not having them memorized and having to read them off of cue cards or blackboards, or, you know, there's the scene when she comes in after Shell Jr. Breaks up with her and she's rooting through the dresser looking for the bottle of bourbon. She had trouble stringing sentences together. That's how strung out and how messed up she was at this point. So the line is, "Where's that bourbon?" And she said, "Where's the bottle? Where's bourbon? Where is the..." Like, she said every possible way to say it without saying it right. Mm-hmm. She would have to do 40, 50 takes sometimes, to the point where in that scene specifically, Billy Wilder had to tape the line in the drawer, but then she couldn't remember which drawer had the line in it, so she's opening it and she still can't find it, so we just put it in every drawer. And then I even read that she might not have gotten it even still, so you see when she reads the line, her back is to camera, right, and it's more than likely dubbed,
right,
because she just couldn't get it, because she was such a mess.
Or I wonder if they pieced together different edits.
They probably did that.
Right.
I mean, you could get her in the booth and have a piece of paper in her hand and get the line, but and you feel for Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon as well, because I read that they didn't enjoy the drag and wearing the heels and all of that, but then they had to endure it that much longer because she was having so much trouble with her performance.
Right.
So it's like, yeah, now you guys get it. And there's a really great line, and I'm so proud of Billy Wilder as a feminist, that he has the line after Osgood pinches Daphne's butt in the elevator. He's so mad about it. And Joe says to him, "Well, now you know how the other half lives."
Right.
This was 1959.
Right.
And there's somebody who's like, yeah, it sucks for women out there. Nothing's really happened in that regard, but I'm glad that he at least had the conscience to be like, let's comment on this a little bit.
Right.
And I think that leads to movies like Tootsie, too, where, we get to see how the other half lives, and it's terrible. And we really should do something about it. We should do something about it. Anyway.
Right. And that is what endures about this film, is that arc is put in there. And that, Tony Curtis's Joe is just going through everything that's wrong with, male chauvinism and male sexism, of I'm going to pretend to be someone else. I'm going to pretend to, I'm going to manipulate this poor girl because I know exactly how I can do that in order to get exactly what I want from her. And it is those quieter moments with Marilyn Monroe where you really do get the heart of this movie, because at the end when she's singing "I'm Through with Love," and then Joe sees her, and there's that awesome, beautiful shot of Joe looking at her, and the lighting is just sprinkling all over his face, and you know that he gets it and that he understands it, and that
I've wronged this girl.
I've wronged this girl,
fix
and
it.
Not only it's not even it's like I don't even know if I can fix it, but just knowing the fact that I did this to her.
Yep. Because they're this close to making it. They're this close to out the door.
Right.
But he can't leave things the way they are because he knows that he's wrong.
Right.
And having been a woman for the last, however many weeks, he gets it even more, that he's like, what I've done is just, it's a dick move. It sucks. And I have to do something about it. And then the moment when they kiss, and then what's the band leader's name? It's not Sue.
Beanstalk.
No, he's the manager, the woman. It's out of my head. Anyway, she sees it and she freaks out. And Beanstalk! Also, Beanstalk? Come on.
That's just a ridiculous name.
Come on, Billy. You can't think of a better name for the manager than Beanstalk?
I don't know. I think it's funny.
Of course it's funny, but it's absurd. It's such a ridiculous name.
It's farce.
True, it is farce.
Let's talk about a little bit of the favorite scenes.
Oh, all right. So many. Well, there's the first time we see him playing the millionaire, and he's doing his Cary Grant impression.
Nobody talks like that.
To which Cary Grant was like, I don't talk like that. And it's just so over the top and silly, and that's why we named the company after it. And she just is eating up every word of it. And her performance in that scene is really good too, because you believe that she's believing this, but you don't. It's a great layered performance, because you're not just like, oh, what a floozy. You're like, oh, honey, no.
Right.
But at the same time, he is very convincing, and he could be a meal ticket, and that could be how she gets out of all of this mess that she's in.
Right.
The party scene on the train is great, and got all those girls crammed. Party in compartment 7, party in this thing. And then you're using a hot water bag as a cocktail shaker, and just the ingenuity of these girls, gotta say, it's pretty great. Now, I've got cheese and crackers.
Do you have any maraschino cherries?
No. What? Why? What's going on? Yeah. What about you?
Well, just with the scene where she discovers Shell Oil, when Jack Lemmon comes over and sees and gets that it's Joe, and just the way he has fun with that, and it's like, oh, let's go tell him right away.
Yeah.
Let's go tell Daphne. Awesome. And then when they get back, and she's in the tub, and he's trying to, like, what? And then she gets up, and he's in
the full suit seat. Yeah.
One of my favorite sequences is the swish pan sequence. So Joe as Shell Oil and Marilyn Monroe are on the yacht. She's trying to seduce him, because he's like, nothing, doesn't do anything for me.
Good move, by the way.
Right.
It's effective. Take notes, gents.
And then, so kissing on the couch, and then swish pan over, and Osgood and Jack Lemmon dancing, and the rose, and just, and just, the before Martin Scorsese, we have our brilliant swish pan sequence between two different scenes, and it's just, it's dizzying, it's effective, and you just get two opposite ends of the spectrum. It's just, he was always the one, especially in this interview book, he's always the one that says, don't be too tricky with the camera, always tell your story, but he always finds the perfect way to tell that story and use camera tricks along with it and be cinematic. So, lessons to be learned.
Yeah. I did not realize...
Perfect ending.
Oh, perfect ending. Before we get to the ending, I didn't realize that this was based on a French film called Fanfare of Love, released in 1936. And then they actually weren't able to find a print of it, or they find the script for it. But there was a German remake of it a few years later, which the producers bought the rights to that, and then Billy Wilder built the script off of that. And then he added in the gangster subplot, which is brilliant. Because, you could have these musicians on the run kind of story, but you have to have those stakes. And by putting it in, 1929, like we have that whole conversation with them in the bandstand, where he's like, oh, you think all of this bad stuff's going to happen? One of them being the stock market crash, and all of them happen.
Right.
Like, he just has this crazy foresight as the character, but then also he kind of has it in real life too, because after working with Marilyn Monroe on this movie, Tony Curtis kind of had a premonition that she had 1 or 2 pictures left in her, and that was pretty much on the money for when she died at age 36, which is rough. Oh, if you guys aren't listeners of You Must Remember This, the podcast, she has a great, I think it's like 8-part series on Marilyn Monroe. Oh, it's heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking what this woman went through, but it's also incredibly edifying, because if you only know her from her movies, you think she's just the dumb blonde.
Right.
But her whole life is just tragic. So I highly recommend that. The ending. They got it? Well, the what is it? The Association of Italian Opera Lovers or whatever it is. Genius. Genius front, because then the guy stands up and he's like, I'm the self-appointed president. And you're like, oh, this is just mafiosos. Got it. Yep, solidified, nailed it. I got it. And then they bring out the cake, and then bah, 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 bah. And then even the cops come in, and nobody's phased. None of the gangsters are phased at all. They're like, oh, we had some cake, and something in it didn't agree with him.
Right.
Great line. Great line. Oh, I wish I could write crime like that. I tried, and that didn't work out.
And from there, it's like, as complicated and as, complex as everything gets with, Joe pretending to be Josephine, who's then pretending to be Shell Oil and blah, 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 and all the, that ending. So we found a way to get the gangsters in and why they show up here.
Yep.
And then we dispense with the gangsters that were after them because there's other gangsters that were upset about the thing that they did back then.
There's always a bigger fish.
Right.
Stupid Star Wars prequel.
That happens, but then they're underneath the table, so they get up and then, hey, stop those guys. They saw what we did. So they're on the run again. And it just keeps it, just like he says, where your third act must build in tempo, and then that's it. Just don't hang around. That's what it does. It's just like they're on the run, they're on the chase, and then
same thing. These older movies, I'm watching it, and I'm like, okay, this has to be close to the end. I had 6 minutes left. And we're nowhere near the end of the movie. I'm like, this is so stressful because he does it so well of build, bang, end, movie's done.
Yep.
And we have that great line that wasn't even supposed to be the final line, where he's listing all of the things to Osgood as to why they can't get married and why it won't work out. And Osgood is forgiving of all of it. Oh, that's fine. I don't care. It's not a big deal. I don't care that you smoke, whatever. Oh, I'm a man. Yeah, nobody's perfect. So that begs the question then, does he still want to marry Daphne? How's that going to work out? And we have the great scene too where, after the dance and all the swish panning, and he's, going on and on about how happy he is to be engaged, and he's got the maracas and all that stuff. And he's like, how's this going to work out? When are you going to, and without being crude or anything, they allude to the whole thing of, you're two guys.
Right.
How are you going to consummate this marriage? And he's like, that's probably when I'll say that we shouldn't do this.
I'm not stupid. I know there's a problem. We have to meet his mother.
Oh, so good and so smart.
Did you read that the maracas were an addition because the audience was laughing so loud that they were missing lines of dialogue.
Yep.
So he had to put that in there so that, let them laugh, let it die out, and then hit them with that next line.
Yep. Because how many times does that happen where you're like, well, I missed that line, rewind.
Right.
Genius. 6 Academy Award nominations. Best Actor for Jack Lemmon, Director, Screenplay, and it won for Best Costume Design. And reading through that list, I was like, wow, what won that year? And it was Ben-Hur. So you're up against some stiff competition for Best Picture. And, a black and white comedy probably isn't going to outshine Ben-Hur.
Comedies never get justice.
Yeah, it's not fair. That's why they get Golden Globes all the time, though, which are also just kind of a joke. It was voted the top comedy on AFI's 100 Years, 100 Laughs in the year 2000. And it holds up, man. It really, really does. What do you have influence-wise and filmmaking-wise? Bring us into your filmmaker corner.
Sure. So in terms of influences, so just something about, so obviously Tootsie, to the point where when Dustin Hoffman and Sidney Pollack were hashing out the story for Tootsie, Dustin Hoffman kept referring to Some Like It Hot and saying, like, where are the machine guns? There's no machine guns in this movie. Like,
right.
Why do I put on the dress? And Sidney Pollack's like, well, because your agent tells you that you're never going to get a job ever again. Like, no one wants to work with you.
Yeah.
To which, just a sidebar, crazy story about Dustin Hoffman. So Dabney Coleman was going to be playing the agent. Sidney Pollack says, well, your agent tells you that that you're never going to get work again. And he's like, well, Dabney Coleman tells me that. Like, he's a colleague. I'm not going to listen to a colleague.
Right.
If you played the agent, then I would put on the dress. And Sidney Pollack's like, you're insane. Like, I'll play it, all right?
Sure.
If that helps you.
Weird method actors.
But yeah, with Tootsie, and even more, like there's a couple of jokes in this book where Billy Wilder, because Cameron Crowe asks him about Tootsie, and he's like, I take offense to Sidney Pollack saying that he invented this new cut where he didn't have any backstory about how, like, her putting on the dress or getting the makeup on, they just cut to Dustin Hoffman as Tootsie.
Right.
And he's like, I did that. They're on the phone with the thing, and then they cut to the legs, and they're
There they
dry. And then, like, the whole thing about having the arc of the man who is dressed as a woman discovering finally what it is like to be a woman. Tootsie kind of takes that even further and even deeper. But it all started with Some Like It Hot. And just a couple things like, Young Frankenstein, just because I know that Gene Wilder loved this movie and loved Billy Wilder and thought about it while he was writing it. And just the fact of, like, that movie and The 40-Year-Old Virgin were, like, two recent movies that I can think of where a one-joke premise is stretched and, opened up and
it is a
more.
success. Yeah, definitely.
Birdcage.
Yep. Well, La Cage aux Folles, obviously. But The Birdcage is one of my favorite movies. I absolutely adore that movie. And when Robin Williams passed away, that was the first movie I put in. We own several, but sidebar, that was one of my favorite performances of his as well. And it shines a light on, a part of our culture that I don't know anything about is the straight white guy.
Right.
So it's the same kind of thing as this, where it's like you get to see how the other half lives. And it's heartbreaking.
And there is also, like, there's such what is so refreshing about this movie, even when you look at it through modern eyes, is how open-minded it is about so many things. And there's never a moment where you feel like it's judgmental in any way. You mentioned the fact about, you're two guys, how is this going to work? Like, it's not done in a tasteless, like,
Right. How do the
come
parts fit
down on
together?
you biblically.
Yeah.
And even at the end, like, that closing line is like, yeah, nobody's perfect, so why are we telling anyone how to love and how to live?
Yeah.
Which is awesome. And in terms of, like, the filmmaking, I'd have to kind of think about I'm sure this isn't the first movie that combines comedy and violence in this way.
Yeah. But certainly one of the first.
One of the first, and just in terms of blending laugh out loud, gut busting farce with pitch black violence.
Yeah.
And that happens, like, every comedy you see, they're putting in, like, there's a hitman in this comedy
Pineapple
scheme.
Express.
There you go.
There's a good example where you just have this over-the-top violence. And you're like, whoa, and then 2 seconds later you have a fart joke.
Laughing out loud.
Yeah, it's great. So why did they decide to shoot it in black and white, David?
Because when they did the makeup on Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis, for that matter, they looked at it in color, and Billy Wilder's just like, yeah, no, this isn't going to work. We're going to have to do it in black and white. And it's weird that, in 1959, and then the next year in 1960, he does the same thing with The Apartment. It's like, it was a big deal to shoot it in black and white because they all the studios wanted to push their Technicolor. But I think, the fact that they did as many makeup and costume tests as they did, I'm sure he was able to show it to someone there and say, like, look,
this is for the best.
Yeah.
And it works, too, because then they can blend into the background. They become part of the band and the ensemble, and you can almost forget that it's two men in drag.
Right.
Speaking of, they actually hired a female impersonator named Barbette to train the men on how to walk and act like women. And Jack Lemmon politely declined and said, I don't want to walk like a woman. I want to walk like a man dressed like a woman. Because if it's too good, then I don't believe you again, because it's like, well, you're too good at this. I don't see any difficulty for you. It lowers the stakes if suddenly they're just great at being women, too. And we have all these little jokes in there, too, that are just so smart and so simple. Like, he's got bullet holes in his base. What are those from? Oh, I don't know. Mice? Yeah, they're clearly bullet holes. And then the gangsters, that's how they're found out, because they remember that he had the base, and they look at it and they see the bullet holes.
Right.
Oh, just so many little things that pay off throughout the film, because Wilder was a genius.
You can tell that they worked on the script for a very long time before they committed to anything going to celluloid.
Yeah.
And it's that care and affection that they have for screenwriting that is what continues to inspire me as I watch their films, because yes, you do get that it's just everything is perfectly plotted and paid off in such a way that it just, you long for it because you're like, oh my God, like look how perfect this is. Like, you know, just a perfect story, perfectly told. And you look at some movies now and you're like, I don't get that same thrill.
Yeah.
Sometimes you do, and you're like, there it is. But you look at these films, specifically Billy Wilder films, and you just get it. Like, you know, Steven Spielberg always said that he's like, you know, some filmmakers they try to get a string of pearls, and like there's particular films of Billy Wilder's where it's just like it's a perfect string of pearls, and every little moment works.
Yeah. And I mean, just comparing the two Billy Wilder films that we've done on this show, The Apartment is still laugh out loud funny, but deals with dark materials. And we have, you know, the suicide attempt and all of that. The same thing with this. This is much more farcical. That's more based in reality, but we have this high farce and high stakes with what's going on, and he executes it perfectly. There's not a wasted scene, there's not a wasted moment, there's not a wasted character. Like even the thugs on Spatz's crew, they all have their little moments, their little bits. When the guy's got his bag of golf clubs and he's like listing them all off and he doesn't know what they are, and then they pull out a golf club that's a Tommy gun. What? Some prop guy was like, this is silly. But yes, I will take a Tommy gun and I will put a golf club into the barrel, and there you go. There's your prop. Ridiculous. Let's see. This movie was banned in Kansas. They thought it was too indecent for Kansasans. Kansas, you're ridiculous. Also condemned by the Roman Catholic Church. All because it's two guys wearing dresses. What are you going to
think about now?
Right? Ugh. It's sad. It's what it is.
What else you got for trivia?
There surprisingly wasn't a lot of trivia on this movie. It was a lot of other actors in consideration, which, let's just put it out there. IMDb, take that off, or put it into one, because it's dumb and it's boring. That's why it gets so many downvotes. A working title was Not Tonight, Josephine, which I thought was fun. It ended up being 2 months over schedule and $500,000 over budget, largely because of Marilyn Monroe, because of her tardiness and her inability to get the lines right. But then there was one scene, I forget which one now, but there's one that they had slated like 2 or 3 days to shoot it, and her and Tony Curtis nailed it in 20 minutes. So sometimes it just clicks, I guess. What else we got? So the costumer for this film, who the only Academy Award win they got was for costumes, he was measuring the 3 leads for dresses, and he jokingly said to Marilyn Monroe that Tony Curtis had a better butt than she did, to which she promptly opened her blouse and said, yeah, but he doesn't have better tits, which I thought was funny. She's a silly lady.
Nice, Marilyn.
Yeah. Also, I never realized this, but it makes total sense. Tony Curtis's Josephine lines were dubbed over by another actor named Paul Frees, and it was actually kind of a combination of their 2 voices, because he wasn't able to maintain the falsetto all the time.
Right.
It was too difficult for him vocally to do, which makes sense because he's pretty high up in his register, and to be able to talk like that throughout the whole movie, after a while your voice would be cracking and people would be like, what's wrong with you? Are you going through puberty in your 40s? Miss? I think, miss? Yeah, that's really all I got.
And it's really great that I think the 2 of them work so well together. And there's a point where you think, you know, if you had to nail it down, I guess Tony Curtis is the straight man to Jack Lemmon's craziness and zaniness. But he's just as funny trying to be this billionaire. And he's got so many great moments in it. And it's just, you know, just a perfect comedy team that they have. And that whole scene when they're kissing and they're on the yacht, and there's that quote that he says he never said, says he never said that kissing Marilyn Monroe is like kissing Hitler. But you can just get the sense, like, I love that, Billy Wilder knows that he can't show much in terms of sexiness.
Because of the Hays Code.
But they just got that perfect shot where it's from behind his head and she goes in to kiss him and you see his foot go up and just straight up. And there's no mistaking what that's supposed to be and what that is supposed to represent and symbolize. And that is also what I think is really great about looking at these old movies, because they had so many restrictions and they had so many bars put on them.
How do you still express yourself and make your art within the confines of this ridiculously conservative and oppressive regime that's over top of you? And just like the end of North by Northwest with the train going into the tunnel, if you don't see it, you probably don't see it. But then once you do, you're like,
I get it.
I gotcha. I know what that means. And if it weren't a farce, that wouldn't have worked. That would have been over the top and ridiculous. But since it's well within the story that it's being told, that works perfectly. And he's trying to play this character. How else is he going to express his joy and enthusiasm for the goings-on that are happening on and around his face? But just stick that foot right out there. Genius. And you got to wonder if that's, I'm sure it's scripted because Billy Wilder's a genius like that.
Right.
Or if it's Tony Curtis being like, here's a little something I can do. And it pays off in spades.
One of the things, because sometimes we don't have enough time and we forget to talk about the music, but I love the jazz score of this and all the jazz music that's in it. It works so well, and it even adds to, that's where they get the title. Just the fact that with so much going on in this movie, so many mixings of tones and different types of comedy and farce, you get these three great musical numbers from Marilyn Monroe. And, each one kind of you can even look at and say, like, for this particular sequence, this is the perfect song to kind of crystallize this mood and this tone that we're going for, up until the end when she's singing "I'm Through with Love." And just the way that he is able to use music in that is also a way that he tells the story.
Perfectly.
Nothing is, whether it's the camera, the lighting, the performances, the costume design, the props, everything is there for full effect and just to tell this story. He's
a complete filmmaker. There's not a missing piece of the two films that we've covered so far. There's every prop, every lamp, every couch, the way that the hotel is set up, the fact that he uses a hotel in San Diego that still in the 50s still had that Art Deco style of the 20s, so they don't have to move the production to Florida, is genius. And it's so smart. And they filmed all of it in California, so all the Chicago stuff is this is MGM.
Yes.
So it's the MGM backlot, and you got the snow machines and all the other stuff. But he creates those scenes looked cold. They looked freezing cold when they get off the subway and they're walking and they don't have their overcoats anymore because he pawned them to bet on a dog. You feel for him the whole time, and especially having been an actor in New York. And I had one of my first roommates was a jazz musician. He played keyboard, so he had to schlep his stuff around the city. He'd carry his keyboard on his back with the stand strapped in there somewhere, and he'd carry it on the subway, and he'd wander all around. We lived in Astoria, but he'd play in the Lower East Side, which is, a madness to get anywhere, for $50, $75 a pop. So you can't make a living doing it, and then, as an actor doing the same thing. Like, I always joked that, oh, it's raining today, it's because I have an audition. And that happened today. We're filming the show. I had an audition before the show today, and it rained, cats and dogs. So I dress up, I try to look good, and then I go outside and my shoes are ruined and I'm soaking wet and everything else. So you see these struggling musicians trying to get by in freezing Chicago with no coats, and they're going to get kicked out of their apartment. The guys in the deli won't let them buy anything on credit anymore. The laundromat's going to send guys after him and all this other stuff. You get it. He sets it up so perfectly well. And then once we're down in Florida, it's such a relief, but the whole time they're still on the run and they're still in hiding.
Right.
Like their whole plan is that once they get to Florida, they're going to just get away from it all and just run away. But then Joe, falls for sugar and, has this whole elaborate thing that he wants to try. And if he can, it's a completely different movie if he can just walk away from sugar, but he can't because of his own pride and his own, male desires.
And that's the great thing about him doing all of that legwork with the script is that there's, he answers all those questions so that the audience never says, well, wait a minute, why don't they
why
just
wouldn't
leave?
he just leave?
And you never think that for a second because you're just with them all the way.
You can't find any holes in it anywhere.
Right. And it is great that they are such great observers in terms of, getting those little details about, well, they're musicians, so he's going to have to schlub that,
that bass
everywhere. And, it's going to be cold because they're in Chicago. It's going to be windy as hell and all of that stuff. And that's what adds to when they are in deep crap, like they have nowhere else to, this is the only option and you believe that. And it's also great that like each movement, it is like the script is like a train in terms it keeps moving, but it also keeps moving through different places and scenery. You get the cold of Chicago, and then they're on that train, and it's a little claustrophobic, but they're having fun. Then they get to sunny Florida, and you're just like,
everything's going to be fine. Wait, who's that? It's the Chicago gangsters.
Right.
Why are they here? A perfectly plausible explanation. And they're in our hotel. I challenge anyone to try to find a plot hole in this story because I don't think you can find even a single one.
And even it's not there because you're not looking for it. And even if you are looking for it, you probably won't find one. But also, it does such a great job of within each section, like you said, like you're on the train, you're meeting all these new characters. You get to Florida, you meet Joey Brown. And then, even the elevator operator that has the thing with Josephine. He's just so great at just filling the scenery with so much detail and so much character.
That one character could very easily be just like a walk-on, no big deal, but he gives him something to do. And I also love the commentary on Prohibition because we have this underlying thing of this is the time of Prohibition. Everyone thinks that it's dumb. Everyone thinks that it should go away. From the first scene, we have them smuggling booze, and we go into the speakeasy. And then Marilyn Monroe's drinking on the train, and then all the girls are drinking on the train. And then the elevator operator is like, I got a bottle of gin. That's a prize in 1929 to be like, I got booze. Ooh, cool. Let's hang out. Let's, all that. And it's this underlying commentary throughout the whole film that isn't ever blatantly said, we oppose Prohibition. We think that it's dumb. But then they come back and they find him in the bathtub, and his line is, "Oh, did they repeal Prohibition?"
Right.
Just every time we can say something about it, he does in a subtle but progressive way.
Right.
And yes, it's 1959, so it's already happened, and hindsight's 2020. But it's the same kind of thing of like you look back on it, and you're like, guys, this is dumb.
Right. And even that, that fits in with. I'm telling a story about two men that dress up like women that is also kind of hitting this taboo of, transsexual, whatever, and the fact that we're writing this in 1959 to comment on the prohibition that is happening in 1929, just as we are looking back and saying that was stupid, we are going to at some point look back and say it was stupid that we were so up in arms about two men dressed as women.
Yeah. Calm down, Roman Catholic Church.
Right.
We got a cool Pope now. I like our Pope a lot.
He's so cool.
Final thoughts? Anything else?
Oh my God.
I find it difficult to have too much to say when I just love it.
Right.
Because I just love it. It's great. It still holds up. It's still funny. it keeps you engaged the entire time. The performances are all fantastic. I didn't actually look to see who won Best Actor that year, but, you know.
Oh, it was Charlton Heston.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. So, come on, Jack Lemmon.
Comedy, though. Comedy never wins.
Comedy never wins. You know, it is. It is still laugh out loud, gaga funny. And just the fact that it is, if you are getting into comedy writing, if you love comedy, if you want to do comedy, I mean, it is just something that you need to watch to see how you make people laugh.
Yeah.
And do it well. And, you know, laughter that holds up on repeat viewings is so hard to do. And this film does it.
Yeah.
And it's almost like there is a lot of, it's a little bit of magic to me how this film works and why it works, and, you know, wanting to get in there and just kind of study it.
Because on paper it shouldn't.
Right. I mean, because you're dealing with like this one joke that should just not be able to last a sitcom even.
Yeah.
And somehow they make it into a movie that, you know, is just gangbusters. And I do think it is the fact that he is so tight with his structure, you know, so genuine with the emotions that he wants to investigate. And at the end of the day, he just wants to make people laugh.
Yeah.
And it does it. There's a great story about how Jack Lemmon was with Billy Wilder on I forget where, it was probably Kansas, but they were showing it. It was like a little sneak preview.
I read this too. Yeah.
It went terrible. Like, nobody laughed. They hated it. They're leaving the theater, and Jack Lemmon's like, "Geez, Billy, like, what are you going to do?" And he's like, "Oh, nothing."
Yeah.
And he's like, "What do you mean? Like, that went horrible?" It's like, "No, it works. They're stupid."
Yeah.
And they showed it in another place, and it was like, you know.
Yeah, they showed it in West Hollywood, and people were on their feet cheering. And it's like, yeah, it depends on where you're watching it, 100%. Cool. Well, you can find this in DVD. Is it out on Blu-ray yet?
It is.
Oh.
I got to upgrade.
Yep.
I wish I had, so that I could be like, hey.
This actually has some really fun special features on it too, which I didn't have time to watch, but there's nostalgic look back with Tony Curtis and Leonard Maltin, which I would love to watch because that sounds fantastic. And then a bunch of other featurettes and things. You can rent it all the usual places, $3 to $4. And there's another Fathom event for this one coming up as well, which is why we're covering it. This one's going to be June 11th and 14th, again at 2 and 7 p.m. So 2 Fathom events already this season.
It's pretty cool.
Boom, boom, boom.
2 great movies.
Yeah. All right, well, that does it for this episode. What are we going to be doing next week?
Next week, very exciting, we're going to be introducing a third guest. So Devin Newell is going to be joining us to discuss Federico Fellini's beautiful 1960 masterpiece, La Dolce Vita. It's one of my favorite movies. I know it's one of Devin's favorite movies, so we're going to have a really excellent discussion for that, because we were talking at the comedy club, and I was telling Lincoln, I joked with him that, you know, we probably could have closed the place because we just started talking about La Dolce Vita, and then we just went on a big tangent about other films.
I just walked away at one point. I was like, have at it, boys. I got other people to talk to. And then I turned back, and they're still talking to each other.
And then he texted me, and he's like, we should probably have Devin on the show.
Yeah. Well, when we posted the picture on the Facebook page, that was the first thing he said to me when we talked at work. He's like, oh, you guys are doing La Dolce Vita. That's one of my favorite movies. And he went on and on and on. I was like, yeah, I haven't seen it, so I'm excited.
Perfect.
And then I was like, we should probably have Devin on. And he was recently on my podcast, the What the Hell Are You Watching podcast, and that was really great. So if you want a little bit of a taste of his insight on film, check that one out. It was an episode about Cloverfield and 10 Cloverfield Lane. And we've gotten the best feedback pretty much since Tim and I started doing it together with him on it, and a lot of people being like, you might add him on as a third host. We'll see what happens, but he's going to be great, and he's incredibly well read, and it's going to be a blast, and having a guest will be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And, you know, I accidentally ordered 3 mugs, so worked out perfectly.
Perfect.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us again this week on Vermont Film Essentials. As always, I'm Lincoln Hayes.
I am David Metzger.
And we will see you next time.